Coogs house. The Houston Cougars got back in the win column, rebounded after their troubles in Las Vegas with a win over Butler. But what really got better?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater who came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate you making your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. If you enjoy the conversation, but don't say, tell us in the comments down below. Tell us in the comments down below what your thoughts on the college football playoff are. Big thing happening across sports. I still think BYU got screwed, but that's neither here nor there. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. More on that fun later. A lot of cool stuff going on over at FanDuel. But today, we're going to be breaking down the Houston and Butler basketball game from the weekend. Houston wins 79 to 51. 28-point victory is what my head was at there. Big time win to get back in the win column for number 17 at the time of this recording. Houston. But we got to get into talking some about like what we learned in this game. Maybe did the need to play deeper? What happened with the second half with LJ Cryer? But first and foremost, the thing you got to talk about when you talk about this game is that Houston found a different gear. Houston started this game with JoJo Tugler back at center instead of Javier Francis, and that seemed to be a big part of the motor that the rest of the team fed off of. Coach Kelvin Sampson said after the game that JoJo's been the best player on the team thus far, and that's why he earned the minutes. You got to go with the guys that played the best. Got to reward that, and that energy that JoJo naturally plays with the pogo stick kind of bounce, the long arms and wingspan touching every single pass, his like half the floor, it feels like. It all seemed to just kind of bleed into the way everyone else played. And for what it's worth, I think that motor is something that this team was lacking in some of those, at least in the offense side of the ball. Some of those games earlier in the season, I think you saw bleed into the way Jawan Roberts was playing. A lot of big time rebounds, a huge block early in this game. He was moving as well as I've seen him move in a long time, just flying around. You saw Milos Uzan and LJ Cryer fighting to get the ball up as fast as they could, just like get the ball in my hands, and we're running. The speed and intensity of Houston was palpable. It was visible on the TV screen. Jumped off the screen, and Butler looked blitzed. They really had no idea how to handle what was coming. Fumbling layups and transition on air, even like just didn't know what to do. And Butler's going to be a good basketball team this year. Had a couple key transfer in and those kind of guys, and Thad Matta is a good coach. They might not be the back they were with Gordon Hayward going to the NCAA championship game or whatever, but like they're going to be good. Didn't seem to matter. The speed, like also I think kind of rushed Houston's offense a little bit in the first half. You ultimately saw it kind of turn into attacking the rim, 28 points in the paint, a big time attacking the rim kind of game for Houston. And I think that you saw that kind of feed into a more rhythm set of shooting from the perimeter. Houston shot, I won't say Houston shot just 18 threes and went 9 of 18 from three outside. And some of those were deep shots, like what Emmanuel hit one, like his feet were on the logo at half court or whatever, right? But on the whole, it was a rhythm set shooting, a lot of kick out kind of stuff, and designed kind of get inside then outside kind of movements. And ultimately, I feel like what you saw out of that was just better shots, and that aggression that got the ball inside in the first place before it got outside led to more open shots. Speaking of outside, one thing that I thought that was interesting in this game as far as the intensity of it all goes was there was a clear effort to space the floor out and to leave a lot of guys outside the perimeter. And the starting lineup, we mentioned that JoJo Tugler started. Well, what was interesting to me was that Jawan Roberts seemed to be the guy of the two post players that floated along the perimeter more. He therefore gave JoJo Tugler on the roll after he got pick and roll kind of stuff a lot more what we would call roll room, right? He's attacking the rim. There's a lot more space and gaps to attack. Help side defenders trying to come tag the roll have to come farther away, right? And all that kind of stuff. And Roberts isn't necessarily the scoring threat from the perimeter that would normally open that kind of a thing up. When you think of a stretch four, that's the kind of position we're talking about here. And Roberts on offense lined up like that a lot, but it didn't seem to match. Butler covered him almost like he could, but more importantly, I thought Roberts did a great job when they got on the ball on the perimeter of turning into a quick handoff or a quick, like, solid pass or whatever to get the ball out of his hands, but make the defense kind of respect him out there, because if he's going into a handoff and his defender is sagged way off, suddenly the shooter coming off of that handoff is a lot more open because the help off of the screen that the handoff becomes isn't there, right? That's pretty obvious, I think. The Roberts energy there for when he's not banging down inside on offense was visible on defense. He's swiping at the ball, diving on the floor. He had a big block early. Houston had 5 blocks in this game. I feel like every single one of them was huge, huge, huge. Won the rebounding battle, 41-22. It was interesting. So there's a concept defensively called an X out closeout, right? So if you run a pick and roll and then we tag the roller from the help side, that means typically someone on the backside has to cover 2 people while the front side action is happening, right? And so when they skip it, sometimes that means the help side guy has to go cover someone he wasn't initially guarding, and someone who rotated over to tag the roll or whatever has to go find the first. They end up crossing paths. We called it X out because they cross paths, right? There were several times in this game, especially early, where Houston was moving so fast that they would bluntly mess up the assignment on the X out closeout, right? Where they attack the wrong guy, they attack the guy that wasn't even getting passed to or whatever, and they were moving so fast it didn't seem to matter. They'd recover before Butler knew what happened after making a mistake. I think that while it's obviously first half of December, and there's plenty of room to get better and so on, that's the kind of speed we're talking about them playing with that really, really just, for lack of a better phrase, shook Butler and the Bulldogs. I think that's why you see them winning the rebounding battle, having so many blocks and so on. Butler made a crucial mistake here too, though. And Butler went to a 3/4 court press at one point to try and kind of make Houston slowly bring the ball up, and Houston just attacked it with the pass, right? Boom, 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 boom. It didn't slow them down at all. It was kind of interesting to watch how Houston seemed unfazed by that aspect of what Butler was trying to do. There were times it felt like Houston and moving the ball around, almost, hitting mid-range jump shots like Terrence Arsenal did and stuff like that. It's like Butler wasn't there. And I think when you're moving so much faster than the other team, you can over the course of the game get a gauge for they're sucking wind, they're tired, they're not going to elevate off the ground as much. It looked like Butler was run ragged. There was no chance at any point, I felt like, where Butler was going to effort their way back into this game. Now, Houston might have had enough offensive trouble to bring them back in the first half. They got those things fixed in the second, but there was no way that I thought it was ever going to be Butler taking the game. It was going to be Houston letting it slip away because they weren't having enough help on offense or whatever, and that fixed itself over the course of the game with some sets we'll talk about from LJ in the second half. I think I want to talk about the speed, though, and that's probably my last point about the speed intensity that Houston played with. Houston was very fresh, and I think that we also need to take into account that was a big part of this. They played San Diego State, Notre Dame, and Alabama all in the course of a week in Vegas over Thanksgiving. They then had just over a week, not exactly a week if you go to hour to hour, off before playing Butler on Saturday. Those days mattered. They clearly watched film, they clearly got in the weight room and so on, but they also found time to get their legs back. San Diego State, they looked dog tired on offense. Alabama on the road, I guess in a neutral site in Vegas, by the end of that overtime period, I think it looked pretty clear like their offensive shots were struggling, right? Notre Dame wasn't as good as those other teams. I think we'll see San Diego State trounce the Notre Dame team if they ever get a chance to. But on the whole here, you're seeing, I think part of the speed and impact of that in this game was being fresh and being rested. And that's kind of why you fight for things like seeding into like tournaments, is you can get maybe a little bit easier for first round. So the second round, you can kind of keep your legs fresh for, or maybe a little bit better Sweet 16 matchup for the Elite Eight game. You're really more rested up for, right? Because we remember, was it 2022, the Elite Eight game? That Houston just couldn't buy a basket because your legs are so tired. Right? Those, I think it was 2022. I think it was 2022. Anyway, those, I should have probably written that down, but I was trying to go off the top of my head right now in the middle of the night. I feel like the fresh legs is a big part of this, and I feel like this is a better representation of what Houston looks like. For what it's worth, as much as I want to talk about the offense struggling in the first half, 79 in this game, 70 against San Diego State, 80 against Alabama, 69 versus Auburn. They're going to be flirting around that low 70s mark. Now, some of those games were in overtime, obviously, but I think that's worth pointing out that they figured things out in the second half. And I want to talk about how LJ Cryer was a big part of that in the second unit. But first, I want to tell you about our buddies over at Omaha Steaks, because nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled taste and quality of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite. And right now, you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com. We got some on our freezer right now. Trust me, they're worth it. Plus, you can score an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages featuring gourmet favorites. Also, this is a life hack here. If you buy someone else steaks, they'll cook them when you come over to give it to them. Boom. Just like that. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at Omaha Steaks, OMHAA Steaks.com. An extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE, COLLEGE. Minimum purchases may apply. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Coogs here, talking about Houston beating Butler 79-51 over the weekend, and trying to figure out what all happened in this game to make Houston look so much better than they had looked so far. And I want to talk some about how the offense second half was predicated on second half star LJ Cryer showing up. He had 18 of his 20 points in the second half, and I want to stress that he did get shots up in the first half. It wasn't like he was on the bench of foul trouble or something like that. He just is having trouble finding his, you want to call it flow or feng shui, or like he was having trouble getting in the flow of the game and scoring baskets. In the first half, at just 2 points. In the second half, he had 18. And open half, I think it felt fairly intentional. He ran a set where initially he runs off of an off-ball screen and then a handoff, get the ball at the top of the key, and then the big fella, JoJo Tugler, hard rolls the rim off the handoff, and Cryer hits a three to open the half. And that set they would run several times for Emmanuel and Milos, but when LJ did it to start the half, it felt like we're trying to intentionally get him going. They understand his role in the offense. They understand how important he is to the scoring. And frankly, LJ hitting threes opens other guys up. It's kind of a chicken and egg situation there. But if he's hitting threes, that means the guys can't sit on Tugler on the roll. And if the guys can't sit on Tugler on the roll, that means someone has to tag it. If someone has to tag it, that means Emmanuel's open over there for a three. If Emmanuel's covered over there from the help side, that means J1 and so on. See how the thing spirals, right? You got to find something that you can always fall back on. The defense will overreact, have to overcorrect, or whatever. And you roll from there. Houston clearly in the second half wanted to be LJ Cryer and open the half doing so. And for what it's worth, they ran the same set a bunch of times, and he attacks him off the bounce, got in the lane off the bounce, found the rim. He did a great job of mixing up his attack. My favorite basket, though, might have been there was one time he attacked the rim, and he missed. Right, missed. People missed, but Joan Roberts picks up the ball, and you suddenly see this burst of energy at a Cryer to get back. We actually would run sets and call it the Curry cut, right? We cut from the rim, back out to 3-point line with your shoulder square of the rim the whole time, ready to catch and shoot the three. Steph Curry does all the time. Cryer didn't hit a big three about middle of the second half. And that's one of my favorite plays he made of the game because it was like a clear, like he didn't dog himself in this layup. He knew his guy had the ball and he knew it was his turn to shoot. Like there was no hesitation on the three after having just missed. Bluntly, one at the rim he probably should have made, right? And Roberts got the big rebound, which is always fun, and then also the kick out. Roberts finished this game with 12 rebounds, and obviously you could pick and choose which is better, which or whatever. But while he was along the way there, 4 of those 12 were offensive plays like that being made off of them are really, really important. And I think it raised the question. LJ Cryer being a big focal point in the second half offense, does that mean that he is the man this year, right? Where a year ago it was Jamal, the year before that it was Marcus, Jamal Shed, Marcus Sasser, right? I feel like a lot of people assume that as the scoring leader, it's going to be LJ, and also I think people assume that whoever like the man is, the head of the snake, the point of the attack, whatever, that it has to be a point guard because the way the point guard role works, right? Or certainly if it's a guard, then it has to be a point guard. And I think that assumption's not really fair. I think also a lot of people assume that the person that has the ball in their hands the most is just the point guard, and I also know that to be unfair. That's not how things work. And I even watching how well he shot the ball in the second half. I think that honestly, the man of this team is going to be a JoJo or a Terrence Arsenault, right? JoJo Tugler or Terrence Arsenault. I also think we saw what it looks like when the man is a great shooter. Whether it was like the moments Emmanuel Sharp had late where he had a couple big ones in a row, including the super deep one, right? But I feel like Cryer can be an effective elite scorer without necessarily having to like fall back and also be that other guy. Whereas the like get on my back guy might be JoJo Tugler and that motor that led to him getting the start on Saturday afternoon. It might be Terrence Arsenault when he finally is fully recovered and getting his full minute load and so on. He's like, guys, no one in the gym can cover me. We're okay, right? He's a matchup nightmare for everyone else at 6'6", 6'7" depends on who you ask. Crazy long arms, crazy wingspan, but guard-like moves on the perimeter. He may shape into that guy as well. Ultimately, he might alter the starting lineup. Who knows how the things shake out there when he gets more and more minutes. We'll talk about minutes in the depth of the team in the third segment. But I also think that if it's not JoJo, you end up seeing it with Juwan Roberts. I want to keep an eye on kind of how this Juwan Roberts perimeter experiment went. I mentioned in the first segment, he spent a lot more time out there, kind of opening up driving lanes, opening up attacking the rim lanes, and so on. And I think he's a brilliant passer. I think he's a really underrated, effective, efficient passer, Juwan Roberts is. I worry that that's the only offensive skill he has from out that far away from the basket. And outside of that, you're going to see him do that and then attacking the rim and so on. And, figuring out what kinds of things happen there. Regardless, I think we did see Houston take steps to finding that in this game. I think a lot of people assumed that now that Cryer had the big second half, it's his. I don't know that Cryer, I know he came to Houston playing more point guard, but that, just because he had the ball in his hands a lot in the second half, there doesn't mean he was a point guard, even though I did notice that they had, and we'll talk some about the rotations when we get to the depth in a second. They did have a lot of lineups out there with LJ Cryer on the floor and Milos Uzan not. And so what are they going to do with bringing the ball up in those kind of roles? Call me a Terrence Arsenault guy, I guess. I think it's his to have when he wants it. And I think until he can take it, right, until he's playing enough minutes to take it, it's going to be JoJo. JoJo played just 19 minutes in this game. And so I think that's why we kind of feel like it might have floated between a bunch of guys. Houston also, with the team effort and blitzing of Butler, didn't really leave a lot of chance. There wasn't a whole lot of moments where we needed somebody to put everyone on their back and go. Houston jumped out early, extended the lead over the course of the first and half and early second half, and they got hot about midway through the second half, and it was never close again, right? Like at some point, the game script there in a weird way shapes it to where we didn't really need the guy in the way we kind of did against Auburn and Alabama and San Diego State. And frankly, like we'll probably need against different Big 12 teams as we get there later this year. I mean, Oklahoma State is the Big 12 opener on the 30th at Oklahoma State. It's not the most challenging. Playing there is never easy, but that BYU game right out the gates on January 4th, that's hard. That's a tough game, right? And they get them in Fertitta. They get them in an afternoon game. That's a tough opponent very early in Big 12 play. TCU's good. Kansas State's well coached. West Virginia, we're figuring out. UCF, we're figuring out. You go to Kansas on the 25th of January. I mean, this schedule is brutal once you get to conference play, right? And so we'll see, I think, more as they shift who that guy is when they get there. But I belabor that a lot. Let's go ahead and talk about some about the depth rotations, actually, because I think that that's an interesting aspect when you look at this game, because one guy that plays a lot of minutes typically played barely any. More on that in a second, but first, remind you about our buddies over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now you get ready to tackle the NFL action at FanDuel. New customers can bet $5, get $150 back in bonus bets if that bet hits. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. If it's a FanDuel.com, join today. Get started with $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet hits. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Ainsworth, Locked On Cougs. You're looking at Houston's big win, 79-51 over the Butler Bulldogs in the Big 12 Big East Challenge. Trying to figure out what we learned from this matchup. And a lot of people have been talking a lot this season about rotations, specifically about wanting to see a couple guys more often, about wanting to see a couple guys maybe less often. And I think Houston found very quickly, at least in this game, that deeper in the bench might be better by the U12 timeout, meaning by the under 12 timeout. So in college basketball, there's a timeout every 4 minutes based on TV times, whatever. But you listen to this every day, you know that. By the U12 timeout, they'd already played 8 different players. I mean, the first 8 minutes of basketball, Houston had found 8 different players to get on the floor. Mercy Miller and Ramon Walker both being in that group. Obviously, started JoJo Tugler, so you brought Javier Francis off the bench. And then you also, for what it's worth, had Terrence Arsenault. So you had 9 very, very quickly by the time Ramon got in there just after the 12-minute mark. And having 9 players play before they don't play quarters, but before the quarter mark of the game, I think is ultimately kind of indicative of why this team was able to play so fast. I don't think it's any accident. We talked about in the first segment, we talked about how the time between games was a factor. But then within the game, you had those 9 guys play pretty evenly distributed minutes in the first half. And suddenly that looks really, really important. Now, Mercy's 5 minutes ended up only being 5 minutes, and he didn't play in the second. We're still figuring that out. I think Mercy has shown in his 5 minutes he's an effective enough offensive player to play at this level. He had 4 points. He had 3 rebounds. He didn't play that many minutes, and I think that the production per minute is there. I think it's also, though, when I talk about like guys getting confused on X out, cross out, X out closeouts and stuff like that in the first segment. A couple of those are Mercy. Like some of those things that he's still figuring out, right? And we've seen Kelvin Sampson bring freshmen along to play their freshman year. And Jarris Walker being somewhat of an outlier. The guy was a lottery pick, one and done, right? But like Emmanuel played a lot more in January than he did November, right? You can go back and find Marcus played a lot more in January than he did December, right? You're kind of seeing the growth happen with Mercy too, where I think you'll see a lot more of him in that BYU game I mentioned in segment 2, in that Kansas game later this year. You'll see a lot more of Mercy then than you might have seen in November, even though those are honestly better opponents. I mean, Auburn, Alabama are 2 top 5 teams right now, I believe, but generally speaking, the Big 12 is a good enough conference that you can call those teams in January, February better opponents by and large. And I still think you might see more mercy because they're using so much of this time to fast track, teach him to get him on page because he is such an effective scorer. He is such a gifted scorer, right? But on the whole, getting those 9 guys in the first half was important. The big name, if you've been following Houston Cougar basketball for a while, was that Malik Wilson did not get in until the final 2 minutes of the game. And Malik Wilson had been kind of, we thought maybe a backup point guard, maybe. And Uzan was not ever in foul trouble, so you weren't worried about putting him in from that standpoint. Uzan finished with 4 fouls, so he's not like he never had any fouls, but not the same kind of trouble we're worried about fouling out. He would have been in the first those couple games he's fouled out this season that Houston's lost. And I guess the thing there is that, interestingly, without Malik playing, coach's decision, without Malik playing, you saw different lineups take over point guard duty. It was not LJ Cryer, now you are the point guard. It was not Manuel Sharp, now you are the point guard. It was way more of a shared distribution of that job. And there was a lineup that ran out for a lot of that time. There was Arsenal, Emmanuel, Cryer, and Jawan. And I guess you saw a little bit in the first half, the mercy minutes he was in, like he kind of had the LJ Cryer spot as well. And Cryer got hot in the second half. Maybe that's why we didn't see mercy in the second half, right? But ultimately, what you saw was in different opportunities or different moments, you saw Terrence kind of take more of a point guard, steer the ship. Here's the direction we're going to follow kind of role. And then they would seamlessly go to an LJ Cryer. Hey, going to run this pin down right here, that kind of a role. Hey, now it's Jawan's turn. Jawan's going to make sure we're set up in this kind of, like, you saw each of them kind of take turns with it. And I don't know that it's long-term effective, but I do think, first of all, Terrence Arsenal guy, I do think it's Terrence's at some point because he is so confident with the ball and he's such a difficult matchup that he can run it from the forward spot, really. And really what you're doing when you're running point guard is you're orchestrating the offense. You're getting guys in position, choosing when to go, etc. Well, TA can catch that on the baseline and still set up the offense and get things in the right spots, even if he didn't dribble the ball across the floor, right? The point forward role is very real modern basketball sense, as frankly, we get away from positions entirely as you watch basketball and, high levels these days. Terrence can definitely do those kinds of things, right? And frankly, Milos gets guys in the right spots when he's out there, but he's not any more effective of a scorer than Terrence or LJ or those guys are, right? So it's not like it has to be your guy getting all your points. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. And I really like what that group looked like when they were out there. I do think it's telling that Malik was not out there. The post-game comments didn't quite have as much to do with that. A lot of the rotational kind of comments were about and questions were about JoJo starting. But I think we can extrapolate that would be tied into the same thing. And if you're not going to play Malik, I think it's awesome that you saw 18 Ramon Walker minutes. Ramon does a lot of the same defensive things Malik does, plays a very different offensive role. Don't have the ball in his hands a whole lot, etc. And I think that was a plus for this team as well. Not that I like a lot of the things Malik does. I just don't think he's a point guard. Ramon, though, was never going to be asked to play point guard, and so he's never going to get asked to be put in those kinds of spots. But 18 minutes, I think they were really, really important. 18. But that's just my 2 cents. Now, we got a lot more to talk about Houston Cougar basketball throughout the week. They play Troy on Tuesday night. It's kind of a get-right game as they continue to work towards Big 12 play at the end of the month. So we're talking about that throughout the week. We talk about Houston Cougar football, new coaching hires, new players coming in, players leaving, all kinds of offseason chaos with college football as it is the Wild Wild West these days. So hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know we're live. Locked On Cougs, a proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.